Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives with the power of psychedelics. In this episode, I had the honor of speaking with Kevin Matthews, a leader in the decriminalization movement from Denver to DC and back. We talked about his own battle with depression as a West Point cadet and the help he got from mushrooms. Then we discussed decrim and so much more. So let's hear from Kevin. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me here on the Stoned Ape Reports. It's you and I have had a few conversations around the decriminalized nature community, so I'm really grateful and honored to have you here to talk to us today about your experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to talk with you and with your audience.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into this. Obviously, what we're here to talk about is kind of what led you to psychedelics. You know, what was going on in your life before psychedelics, and what your psychedelic experience was like, and then how it kind of helped you change things or transform things, for the better. So, what was going on in your life beforehand?
Man, that's it's a really important question, and for me, and I'm still trying to figure it out sometimes.
Yeah.
But for me, I was in a crisis, and the reason why is because I had recently left the U.S. military academy, so I'm a veteran, and I'm actually retired from the U.S. Army.
Wow.
And I'm retired from the U.S. Army for major depression, and so I was a cadet at the U.S. Military Academy up there at West Point, New York, and I'd wanted to be a U.S. Army officer my entire life. Wanted to serve my country. Wanted to spread the banner of freedom across the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from the age of 9, when I decided I wanted to go to West Point, it took me a decade to get there. So I started at West Point when I was 19. It's my first summer of basic training, and was doing really well for the first couple of years. And then towards the end of my sophomore year at the academy and getting into my junior year, something started to break down. And just lack of motivation, lack of just a lack of a desire to continue on this mission that I had. And so I was diagnosed with major depression at the academy. And at the time, the Army, didn't have the tools, and arguably they still don't, which is why we're doing this work in many ways, but they still don't, they didn't have the tools to address the kind of depression that I had, which, kind of looking back at it, all of this stuff was certainly, at least for me, what I've been able to uncover since my time working with psychedelics and other modes of spirituality and personal growth is, has a lot to do around my birth, right? So I ended up getting a formal discharge from the Army, retired from the Army, and this was back in December of 2008 is when I was formally retired from the Army. And so I floated for a number of years because I'd lost my center. I had aspirations of, this career of military service. I wanted to go into infantry and be a special forces officer and take that path, right? And so when that all crumbled away, I was on the search and floated for a number of years. Definitely got into substance abuse, alcohol, some might argue abusing cannabis to a degree, and really just floating and trying to find my purpose. And it took about, it was about 3 years. So back in early 2011. So actually just about a decade ago, I had met a new group of friends. I kind of uprooted my life. I realized that I had to move out of my dad's place, and start to figure my life out. And it was this group of friends that encouraged and introduced me to psilocybin, and I agreed, and we ended up having an experience one evening that was certainly recreational. And this is, Denver, early 2011, a recreational experience where, I had no idea that it would turn into this therapeutic, blissful, cracking the mind open experience. And in that trip, I was with this group of friends. We just went for a walk in the city. Went to a park that had a playground, played on the playground, and I remember looking up at the sky and looking at the clouds and watching the clouds pass by. It must have been, it wasn't a full moon that night, but it was pretty lit up because of the moon.
Yeah.
And then seeing the clouds go by and just getting the sense or the intuition or the experience or the feeling that, that was my life passing by. Each of these moments kind of stuck in this rut of self-talk, if you're depressed and you have suicidal ideations like that self-talk is pretty tough. And I recognize that, like, I'm in control of this. I don't have to continue to tell myself that I'm this person that has depression. And like in that moment, it's like, I could say that, like, in that moment, the clouds in the sky cleared. I'm sure they didn't, but like in my head, it was like, holy smokes, like my perspective was skyrocketed. And I could see how my mindset and these choices that I've been making all have been to reinforce this notion that I have this disability. Right. And from that moment, I was like, well, I was like, fuck that. Like, I don't have to, I'm in control of how I think about myself. I can make a new choice and have a new perspective and create a new perception for my own reality and how I interact in this experience that we call life. And so it was in that moment that was, well, it changed my perspective. And so there was that part of it, the very subjective personal experience, right?
Yeah.
That was facilitated by the mushrooms, by these allies. And then coupled with that was this experience of being in community with this new group of friends who I felt like I could trust tremendously. And who offered their love and offered their compassion. And it was a fantastic night. I mean, a friend of mine, I actually just saw him a few weeks ago. He recently moved, or a couple of years ago, moved back to Washington State. But he was sitting on the couch that evening when we got back to the house, and he did from seated on the couch. He was in a trance, right? And just relaying some really, like, high level information about his life and about the experience of being a human. And he's a fairly athletic individual. And he literally did a full front flip from seated off the couch and landed on his feet on the floor. And I was just like, what is going on here? But it,
good thing you didn't try it.
What's that?
Good thing you didn't try it.
No, I couldn't try that. I would fall flat on my face. But it was, just to reiterate, like having that incredible, uplifting, mind expanding experience that really formed the foundation for me of why I'm doing this work. And then coming back, we were having a really good time. It was safe. It was it was a really helpful and safe and comforting environment for us to be together. There's about 6 of us. And then you kind of fast forward a few years, because I ended up finding the love of my life, the woman who I'm married to now. Her name is Sheva, who, by the way, we wouldn't have been able to, the campaign in Denver would not have been successful, I think, at least with me at the helm, without the support of my wife.
Oh, nice.
And so we fast forward a couple of years from that experience, and I'm kind of like bought in, right? Like, I'm like, this is important.
Yeah.
There's something to this, to these mushrooms. These are medicine. what's going on here? And I discovered the work that MAPS was doing. And I was particularly interested in that, being a veteran and learning about the work that MAPS was doing in terms of using MDMA to treat PTSD with veterans. And so that was enthralling to me. And that really catalyzed me just doing more research and developing a better understanding of the modern clinical potential of different psychedelics. And some would argue that MDMA isn't quite a psychedelic, right? Some folks call MDMA and empathogen. But the work that MAPS was doing really helped me start to understand the work of and the potential of these different psychoactive substances in a Western context, and open my eyes up to the trauma that, really opened my eyes up even more to the trauma that I experienced, or even sometimes not sometimes, but currently experience as a human being, right? And just the ability of these various compounds to create transformation, Michael Pollan, I guess he really hit it, like create a new understanding. And so that was for me back then. And then fast forward a few years later, my wife and I and our son, we lived off grid for a while in Southern Colorado on, 10 acres of just beautiful high desert land out there, nestled right in the San Luis Valley, which is it's the highest alpine valley in the world, I want to say, capable of agriculture. So lots of potato farms out there.
Right.
But it's just like it's this place where there's this tremendous clear open sky. I mean, you couldn't be at least in Colorado, like, this vast expanse of starlit territory where you can walk out there in the evening and just dive into the cosmos. And it's just right south of the Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, some of the best star watching in the world.
Wow.
And had a couple of experiences out there as well that really informed some of my thinking around this, and really reinforced the necessity of community with this work. And then after we left the valley out there, we came back to Colorado or came back to Denver rather. And shortly thereafter, the work with the campaign started, and, it wasn't really, it wasn't my idea. I think I was guided and directed into doing this work. And yeah, I can say it's still ongoing. The lessons never stop, and I'm just so excited for just what's next, and seeing the momentum of what's happened so far with decriminalizing psilocybin and other entheogens, and what we're experiencing now as a country.
Yeah. And I can't wait to talk to you more about that too. But in terms of all this, did you get any kind of insight as to if there was anything behind that depression? Because the depression kind of came on after you had such hope. You had hope in life since age 9. I want to go, be a soldier. I want to go to the academy, because that's pretty elite. I went through ROTC, so I met a lot of, guys that went through the academy. That's an elite thing to do. It does take a lot of work and a lot of determination to get there in the first place. Did the medicines help you discover anything behind the depression?
Certainly. I'm adopted. And I've known that I was adopted when I was 5 years old. My dad, who recently passed away just about a year ago, my dad read a letter to me that my my biological mom, wrote.
Mm.
And so, early on from that age, I knew that I was adopted. And, I my classmates might see this differently, but, I was one of those kids that was just uh, different in school.
Mm.
And I think that what the mushrooms have helped me uncover about myself is related to the trauma of abandonment.
Mm.
Um, there wasn't any birth trauma per se, aside arguably from being circumcised, which is another
Yeah.
rabbit hole to go down. But this notion of abandonment for me has certainly come into play. And um, not that my mom, who I actually know very well now, my birth mom, she's my mom. Um, she was doing the best she could. She was very young
Yeah.
when she gave birth to me, and she felt like the best thing for me would be to give me up for adoption, which was absolutely the right choice. Um, and then at the time, my father was married and ended up getting a divorce when I was still a toddler. And there was a moment of, I don't remember this, but he relayed to me that when I was very young, as they were going through this process, his ex-wife came over, and I was on the sidewalk, and I said, "Mommy," and she said, "I am not your mother,"
Mm.
and like pointed at me with this rigid, stiff finger. Um, which is why I have
That's
so
hard.
much. Yeah, and I don't remember that, but I get the sense that
That's
kind
rough.
of early trauma has definitely informed my life in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
um, I didn't really have that mother figure growing up. And I really, God, like the love for my dad and what he sacrificed to raise me is, I don't know if I could ever understand that,
Yeah.
because he gave up everything to be my dad. And, in a culture that's, I think in many parts favored towards the wife, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
gave up everything to be my dad.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, so I get the sense that in many ways that unseen trauma was lurking beneath the surface
Mm-hmm.
of my life growing up, in terms of like, because a mom is so important, right? And I think that being nursed, being breastfed is so important as a child. My son is 6, and he was nursed for almost 3 years,
Yeah.
but not having that constant support of a nurturing mother made an impact. And
Oh
my
yeah.
dad, my dad was a go-getter. Like he needed to provide for his family. And so he was a very, he was former military. He was a businessman, and um, it was hard for him to express his emotions, right? And so he was
Yeah.
very, he wasn't authoritative by any stretch of the imagination, but he was very firm. Um, and he instilled in me the mantra of um, work first, then play, and always do your
Yeah.
best. And yeah, so it was. I think like I think that those experiences are at the root of my depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to really hold on to the mindset that no one here is at fault, and if anybody's at fault, it's me. Meaning that like I'm in control of how I relate to my experiences, and I can always make a new choice. And psilocybin absolutely has helped me make a new choice. Um, and I will share as well that potentially, um, and this may be obvious, maybe to some of your listeners, but when I was at West Point, um, I turned 21 my sophomore year when I was there. And that's the year that my mom, my birth mom, reached out to me.
Mm.
And she was like, um, she just wanted to reach out and say, hey, do you want to have a conversation? And I was like, absolutely, I want to have a conversation. You're my mom. Let's do it.
Yeah.
What's going on? And so, you know, I think that had an impact
Oh yeah.
on my, my budding career as well.
You
And
would
like
think so, but I mean, I'm not one to say yes, but it sure does seem like it would.
it seems like it. Yeah, it's taken me. Maybe I'm admitting that now with you. Is like, yeah, like that was an influence. And again, not to place blame on my mom. She just wanted to get to know her son. I have two amazing sisters.
Wow.
She married, and so so I found out, like, basically overnight, that I have a mom, I have two sisters. There's this other big part of my life, this family that I never got to meet or know. And so, yeah, one could argue that probably likely had a tremendous impact on me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would make that argument. Did any of the work with mushrooms or psychedelics bring any of that out about your mom, your sisters, family, anything like that come out during your sessions?
Not yet, not yet. And I'll be, quite frank here. I tend to keep the frequency of my use to about once a year.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm really considering increasing that frequency. um,
Have you
I,
tried a microdose regimen?
oh yeah, I've certainly done the microdose regimen, and that has helped a lot. I mean, I would never say that I'm healed from depression.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, I think that having major depression or just being depressed, right, is a normal part of the human experience. We just need better tools on how to cope with the symptoms and to learn how to recognize them. But in terms of my experiences with psilocybin in particular, those those haven't specifically come up, those experiences, in terms of that trauma, but
Hmm.
the insight afterward, I think, was certainly inspired by those experiences. I'm also, in my earlier years, meaning like 5 or 6 years ago, I was regularly seeing a Jungian analyst,
Hmm.
and he just, man, um, really helped shed some light on this. And um, yeah, a lot of my experiences recently have been pointing towards integrating that part of my life. And I think it's going to take a lot more than just working with psilocybin, but honestly, Stuart, like, this is therapeutic, just sharing with you. And I talk about it
Yeah.
with my family, with my wife, and close friends of mine as well. And um it's just one of those things where, at least I can recognize it and acknowledge it. And it certainly, um at the very least, that insight um makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And it seems like once we've done some of that work, anytime we start talking about it in whatever context, new things can come out, or it just helps. So it seems like, I talk to my wife, I talk to friends or whatever, and you find yourself like, huh, I hadn't really thought about that before. Or, different things solidify, like you said, integrate. And I think that the medicines really help kind of lay that foundation or open your mind up to being open to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Um, Now you said, and first of all, I'm sorry to hear about your dad. You said he passed away about a year ago.
Hmm. You did.
So did he know about all this, about the psychedelics? And if he did, what was his attitude, or what were his thoughts? Was there any kind of a, for his age, the work hard, play hard, do the best you can kind of parenting generation? Sometimes they don't look on this stuff like we do.
Yeah. Well, he was, so he was 72 when he passed away.
Hmm.
He was deeply, deeply, deeply invested in my time at West Point. Um, because early on he saw my potential and always
Yeah.
encouraged me to take that path if that's what I truly wanted. Like, he was always in my corner, whatever decision that I would make, he was always there. And
Nice.
yeah, like at first he was pretty skeptical. I mean, I always ran, um, with our ballot language in Denver, I would run every copy by him and get his feedback. But he was always there in my corner.
Yeah.
And I think that, I'm grateful that, um, before he passed away, he was able to see me complete something that I was so passionate about.
Yeah.
And he was proud. And I'm so grateful that we were able to, that I was able to share this kind of new part of my life with him and for him to be a part of the experience. And I, I mean, he's wherever he is now, he's in the etheric realm. He certainly doesn't need mushrooms.
Right.
But part of me is like, man, if only I could have, you know, really had like a deep dive with him,
Yeah.
with psilocybin before he passed away. Maybe things would have been different. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because the conditions of his passing it was very sudden and it shocked all of us. So he was, anyway, I'm not going to what if myself, like, what if I did this? Like, but it's like,
It's hard.
I'm really happy that I know he was proud. And so
Good.
that's what matters to me.
Good. Good. Yeah, the what ifs are hard. As you know, and probably most listeners know, I lost my son to suicide. And so the what ifs come up with everything. You know what I mean? I think, oh, we could have lived in this neighborhood instead of where I live. What if?
Mm,
I remember buying him these tennis shoes. What if? Every little thing, you're just like, what if? So I can relate to those feelings. So I'm not, yeah, they suck.
yeah. Yeah. I like to
Um,
think that he's, I can have a conversation with him anytime now. And it's,
nice.
it's, yeah, he's still
Yeah.
hanging out. He's
Yeah,
watching.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, that's awesome. Um, but I got to caveat this next question is, I want to ask you what recommendations you would have. So somebody else out there who's dealing with depression, dealing with childhood trauma or whatnot, and they haven't found an answer in traditional medicines, or maybe they've gotten some help, but they know there's more help to be had.
Yeah.
Um, a couple caveats. One is, if you're on any kind of medications, talk to your doctor because there are a lot of contraindications and some can be very dangerous. And I think if I had to predict it, neither Kevin nor I would say that these substances are for everybody. They're not, and we're not recommending that you run out and take them. But given that caveat right there, and now that I've scared everybody and they've turned us off, um, what recommend if somebody came to you, because I know this happens to you because it happens to me when I go to a conference, people come up to me and ask me,
Yeah.
so I know it's happening to you. Come up to you and say, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin. What do I do? I hear all this stuff. I've read all the stuff at MAPS and at Johns Hopkins, and Kevin, what do I do? To get some of the same experiences you have. What advice would you give to somebody who is new to all this?
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. Because I would have said the same stuff that you said. It's really important because psilocybin is not a panacea, right?
Right.
And I think what I would say is that the equally, if not what's more important in terms of working with psilocybin is what happens after the experience.
Hmm.
The integration, the conversations, the insight, the journaling, talking it out. I think it's at least 50-50. Like the trip, some folks are saying now, I've heard along the grapevine that some organizations are trying to take the trip out of psilocybin and other
Yes.
psychedelics to see if that'll have the same impact in terms of therapeutic use. And I would argue that the trip is an integral part of the experience because we need that. We need the default mode network to mute a little bit, right?
Yeah.
For that integration in our brain to occur. different parts of the brain talking to different parts of the brain that don't normally communicate, where we can find this new insight and have this, potentially radical opportunity for healing.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, like, really encouraging people to understand that integration is by far a necessary, absolutely necessary component to working with psilocybin or any other psychedelic, right? I mean, just look to the. I mean, you could look either to the clinical studies as an example, where they do pre and post therapy in addition to the experience, or we know that those studies are modeled after traditional use, where it's not Western style talk therapy, but if you go into if you're using psilocybin or other psychedelics in a traditional way, there's the pre kind of dialogue experience beforehand, at least from my experience, and then the trip, and then afterwards you're wide open, your heart's wide open. At least for me, it has been in some cases, and you're sharing about it, right? So knowing that integration is important. It's not just like in terms of folks who are interested, I would argue that it's not like the medicine's in you, right? Like the potential for healing already exists within you.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need this for folks, especially in my case, where it's like really treatment resistant. We need this catalyst that dissolves the boundaries, right? Or dissolves the what's in the way to find clarity, and then really talking about it afterwards. And so what goes along with that is having, one, doing your research, right? Understanding, why it's important to have a safe environment. And if you're working with other people, that those are people you trust, right? Hopefully they're qualified at the very least as a guide or somebody who can fill that role. And having this, safe kind of cocoon womb-like environment where you feel comfortable to really dive in into your subconscious, to navigate or try to navigate this territory, or at the very least, allow the experience to unfold as it does without your conscious influence. And so with that, understanding that, like, having that mindset, having that intention with this work is critical, because you could, I've done this before, right? You can go into an experience with psilocybin or ayahuasca, or I mean even others like LSD or MDMA, right? And not really have that strong intention.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the experience hasn't been as profound as it is when I have that solid intention. It's like you have to like upload I think the way I like to think about it is like upload the information first. So like the medicine knows what it's supposed to work with.
Yeah, you're kind of laying out the map or the whatever inside there. So when the medicine gets through, it can say, okay, here's what I have to work with.
Yeah. Well, which can go like, it can also go in the opposite direction, right?
Yeah.
I think a big part of this too is like allowing yourself to not be in control.
Yes.
Because if we try to control the experience, again, from my own experience working with this, like there's an element of surrender. Absolutely. But what I found, like at the very least, like, writing down what you hope to get from the experience that's inside of a safe container. For me, 9 times out of 10, it's, I get a lot of value from that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's, the irony is, for me, I don't know that my intention has ever been addressed. I always went into these with like, here's my intention, here's what I want to do. And it seems like, especially with psilocybin, mushrooms are like, yeah, that's nice, Stuart, but here's what you really got to look at, and ayahuasca is like, not even in the same realm of information. It's like, I know you tried to communicate something to me, you simpleton, but here's what we've got, to go. And I would have these weird experiences. And I went to a friend and I told her she had these great experiences in Central America. And I said, listen, I'm not having the kind of experiences with ayahuasca that I was hoping. And she said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I stopped setting an intention. And now I just say, just let go. And she said, well, that is an intention itself. She said, you're actually conditioning your brain with expectations when you say, just let go, because now you're hoping you'll let go. So she said, just go into it and say, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And I took that into a series of ceremonies and just said, I don't know. And it came out of it with just like the biggest lessons.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's really, I always look at people that come in and set these intentions, and I look around the room, and then at the end of the ceremony, we integrate and they talk about it. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe that, they're able to come in here and do like what you said, is kind of pile some stuff up and say, okay, here's the clay, let's work with this. And then it actually works. So I'm always amazed to hear that. And I want people to hear that and not go by what I said, but it's just ironic that my experiences seem to be not unique. Other people have said the same thing, but not necessarily like the way it's going to happen.
Yeah. And I wonder if, sometimes when we set an intention, we're hoping for a specific answer, right? Like, I'm doing super rigid. Like, I want this and I want clarity on this. And so you must give me clarity on this mushrooms. Right. And like,
yeah,
in that case, it's, they're going to be
nope.
like, well, no, here's what you're like. If that's your intention, then, here's what we're going to show you. We're going to have a conversation. And, depending on how deep you go, like it can go, I think at the end of the day, it's always, again, speaking from my own experience, like there's something to be had from the experience that can maybe relate in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about ayahuasca, like I had my 5th, 6th, and 7th ceremony, over a 3-day weekend recently.
Mm-hmm.
Not too recently, but recently enough. I can agree. Like by the 3rd evening and the 2nd cup,
mm-hmm.
Gosh, you know what it was? It was that place of surrender. It was like, and I found myself, like literally found myself in this space of something I've been searching for a long time, which was this space of perfect meditation.
Huh.
And it only lasted a few seconds because my mind started analyzing. Right. And then this bickering back and forth of like, no, get back, go find that space again. Like, no, we got to analyze this and figure out how to get there. No. And then like that kind of spiraled a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think that, I for my own purposes, especially, like it's helpful to me to at least write something down, even if it's, intention may be a strong word. But like, why am I doing this? Why am I voluntarily opting in for a potential ego death? Right.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Temporary psychosis.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. You're talking about how your brain was fighting with itself in this thing that anybody's ever meditated has dealt with on some level. Like, no, shut up. I was there. I was just at that perfect spot. It kind of brings up the subject of consciousness overall. And before you and I, started this, we were talking to each other about some stuff. We kind of brought up the notion of consciousness, and I wanted to know, it's kind of a sidebar, with the subject matter of what we're talking about here, but a lot of people would say it's very relevant because we're exploring our consciousness. So I don't even know what question to ask you, because sometimes I'll ask somebody, so what do you think consciousness is? And they'll be like, wow, that's such a big question. Why don't you start with something easier? But what are, yeah, I did that to one of my guests on my other podcast. Like, so what is consciousness? I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. Let's talk about some other stuff first, and then we'll answer the big question. But what are your thoughts on consciousness? What did you want to bring up, or what was on top of your mind about that?
Oh my goodness. Got to talk about my wife again. And
Yeah,
I might mess this up.
that's
Uh,
right.
but a quote that she has that resonates with me is that life is the divine comedy of the great metaphor. The
Life is
divine,
the divine comedy of the great metaphor.
yeah. And you know, the way that I look at consciousness is that life is a constant feedback loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and recently I've been doing a lot. I've reignited my own interest and like personal research, which seems like such a misnomer, because when one consumes psilocybin mushrooms, they're plunged into this. Again, from my experience, I'm plunged into this, expansive field of potential.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so one could argue that like the work of working with psilocybin and other psychedelics is the work of consciousness and exploring consciousness, exploring the myriad of ways that our awareness can reflect on something inside of our experience. And then so one has to ask, like, what is our experience and how is that defined?
Yeah.
Is it subjective? Is it objective? What are all these, like, how is that experience formed and framed, and what's the context? But you know, I'm certainly not one to argue with the law of attraction. I think that's an actual thing for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that attention matters. I think that our attention, our awareness is our absolute greatest asset. I think that our awareness is the utmost form of currency. And when we say the word currency, folks think of like money, but you just
Mm-hmm.
think of like energetic exchange. It's a current that's running from like point A to point B. And so what we focus on um, tends to manifest in our life in some way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a yogic principle that's again, not going to get this completely right, but um, where energy goes, or where awareness goes, energy flows. Like
Hmm.
what you focus on is what manifests in reality. And I can relate to that because my self-talk, right, with experiencing major depression, it was always negative. It was always like, you're a piece of shit. You're not worthy, blah, 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 blah. And sure enough, like that's how my life showed up. And I, opportunities here and there missed. Um, or because I felt like I wasn't worthy, or I had this like
Yeah.
level of guilt and shame that I was experiencing and constantly reinforcing in my own self-talk, my own perception of reality. And so I think that, there's with, so psilocybin, right? This whole psychedelic renaissance to me is that metaphor. Psychedelics are not a panacea, but they can be a doorway to a new way of thinking. And I think that what we're seeing, in the world right now, especially with rising rates of anxiety and depression and
Right.
suicidality, especially in light of the coronavirus, like, um, gosh, and this is hard, right? But I think that we have an opportunity to, I truly believe that we have an opportunity to inform our reality, or even one might say create our reality. Because to me, what it comes down to is how we respond to our circumstances. And to me, there's a difference between being reactionary and being responsive. I think that reactionary is rooted in our trauma when we react to something,
Hmm.
like just like hitting play because somebody hits your trigger, you get triggered by something, and then you react to it because you're acting from a place of your trauma. And I do this all the time. I react all the time to things, especially with my wife, right? Or my son who's 6 years
Right.
old. So learning how to be more patient and like, so I think, reaction, um, as distinct from responding to life, where responding to life, takes in the information, recognizes the feelings that are bubbling up to the surface, and then, instead of being owned by the feelings and reacting, we're owning the feelings and acknowledging them, and then responding. Um, and so I think that like we have an opportunity literally every second of the day to learn how to respond more than react, and coupled with that, especially if we have this like imagine life is this great psychedelic experience. Elon Musk saying that, we're in a potentially inside of a, what does he say,
A
inside of
simulation.
a simulation right now, like it, if that's the case, if this is a simulation, then perhaps we have a little bit more autonomy over our experience.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
And Dennis McKenna calls it a hallucination reality.
there you go. Right. And so it's like, if the experience of life is this hallucination reality, then from my perspective, we can start to, have a relationship with the experience where we're directing our awareness toward a preferred outcome.
Yeah.
And like, not to say that I could, my preferred outcome is to magically, manifest an apple in the palm of my hands. Not to say that's totally outside the realm of possibility, but like,
Yeah.
I think learning how to respond to life on a moment by moment basis, that's that if not only acknowledges, but is free from our conditioned trauma,
Yeah.
then the more of life we can experience.
Wow. Yeah. The a guy that I call my teacher, whom I've never met, is Ram Dass, right?
Yeah.
And he points out, in the Bible, Jesus says, if you but had faith, you could move mountains. And the funny thing is, you say, I couldn't really manifest an apple in my hand. What he says is, well, you can. When you get to a certain point, you do have the power to do that, but you also realize that you can't. You know what I mean? So when we finally get to that moment, I think it's called city. Like you
Mm,
have powers, and you could
yeah.
actually move a mountain. You could put an apple in your hand, but at the same time, you're wise enough to know that you can't do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I am the ultimate power on the planet.
Yeah,
Watch me manifest this and this and this. Yeah, probably not a great idea.
yeah. Unless you're in a Marvel comic, right? You're smart enough to know, okay, that's not something I should do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's ironic. Yeah, those are
Right.
good points.
I like to think that, well, because I'm a Virgo, by the way, so I'm highly analytical.
Hmm.
My head is certainly in the clouds a lot. And I think that I'm learning how to be so much more in my body.
Hmm.
I think that the seat of our consciousness it's in fact like at our lower centers, like our root chakra or our sacral chakra. If your audience doesn't know about chakras, these are nerve plexuses that exist in the body that have their own kind of functioning purposes. So it's the yogis weren't too far off, right? Like they recognized that these energy centers existed, and it just so happens that if we look at it from a Western medical perspective, that where all of the yogic chakras line up in their system, it also lines up with where all these like highly bundled nerve endings or nerve bundles occur in the
Yeah.
body. So it's like I think that the seat of our consciousness is actually in our gut,
Hmm.
and that's we have, it's called the enteric nervous system, right? And that's where so much of our subconscious kind of like bodily operations occur.
Yeah, there's a whole brain going on down there.
Whole brain down there, right? There's a brain down, like, yeah, it's like millions, maybe, or billions of nerve endings. Same thing with the heart too, right? The heart's a mini brain. I think that, one thing that we get confused a lot by being, immersed in this Western dominated culture and way of thinking is that it is very heady. It's very analytical. We need the data. We need to know by virtue of the numbers what the answer is. Whereas I think in many ways, well, that's valid and a great thing to like have data backing up our experience of life. We also have an opportunity as humans to remember or to get plugged back into our intuition, and that part of our thinking that exists in that kind of belly enteric nervous system. Because from my understanding, the body, the brain's a part of the body, right? And so I think some folks argue that consciousness occurs as a result of electrical energy occurring in the brain and the nervous system. Well, if that's the case, then that must include our entire body. And so, we have these different parts of our body that regulate certain functions, and I think, have a lot more impact on our thinking and on how we interact in the world than we realize. And so, again, a part of this psychedelic renaissance is forming a new relationship with how we understand how our bodies work, and towards the end of gaining a deeper understanding of how we can take advantage of this like tremendous biological quantum supercomputer that is our nervous system and our body, simply having an experience of being a human on this planet that has the ability to connect with the cosmos, right? From these tremendous alkaloids that help us provide an experience or help us experience.
Yeah, they sure do give you some, either a hallucination or reality or whatever, some kind of an insight to that possibility.
Yeah. Which is why I think it's important, like psychedelics aren't a panacea. And I'm not convinced that, looking at models for the future, right, that I'll just say it this way, like these psychedelics need to be used responsibly.
Yes.
If we go back and look at traditional human use over the course of millennia, they're always arguing 99% of the time used in a ceremonial context, right? And not to be taken lightly and deeply respected and venerated for, the doors that can open, the doors of perception, right? That can sometimes blast wide open from an experience.
Yeah, I think having some respect for that going into it, whatever the quote ceremonial aspect is for somebody is important.
Yeah, whether that's in a clinical setting or with your local guide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's great info on consciousness. I love that. Thank you. So as we wrap this up, I know there's a couple of things that I was personally wanting to hear from you in terms of the organization SPORE, your work from Denver to DC and back with decriminalization, lobbying. So fill us in, whatever you want to tell us, the history of it or what you're currently working on, whatever you want to put out there in terms of those efforts, because you've gone from depression in West Point and in your journeys to really making some changes in your life. And now you're actively working to make sure that other people can have access to this.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, and that's a great way to say it is actively working to ensure that other people have access to this, right? Not that folks don't. I mean, if anybody wanted to, I'm sure they could find somebody on the underground to find some mushrooms or find your curandero or curandera. But there are risks to that. And, so much of the work that we're doing is to bring more of this work above board. And a lot of that has to do with education. So, to go back to kind of the beginning of my professional work in this space, after we were successful with our campaign in Denver, and just in case your audience doesn't know,
please.
yeah, in Denver in May 2019, we had a municipal election in the city and county of Denver, and we decriminalized the personal possession, use, and cultivation with no limit on cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms for adults 21 and over. And we prevented the city and county of Denver from using any city funds to prosecute individuals for possession, use, and cultivation. It does
Nice.
not include distribution or profitable sales. So
Right.
that's still illegal. And technically, I mean, we got as close as we could to full decriminalization by preventing the city from using funds to prosecute.
Right.
In a lot of other circumstances, prior to this kind of grassroots legislative renaissance that we're seeing with psychedelics, most decriminalization focused on, minimizing fines, right? So deprioritizing. So in Denver, psilocybin is the lowest enforcement priority in the city. And there's no prosecution that's allowed, but it's still illegal. It's still illegal in the state of Colorado, right? It's still illegal federally. So we understood that after succeeding with our campaign, that we needed to form a public advocacy group whose mission was to educate the public. And so we formed SPORE, and SPORE is the Society for Psychedelic Outreach, Reform, and Education. And SPORE's mission is to educate the public, organize community, and foster leadership in this psychedelic ecosystem that's emerging. SPORE is working towards 501c3 nonprofit status. We're currently fiscally sponsored. And our fiscal sponsors are an incredible organization called Reconsider. That's reconsider.org for your audience if they're interested in checking them out.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the notes.
Thank you. Yeah, which just means that they essentially, we're allowed to receive tax deductible donations through Reconsider, and they go to SPORE, which is huge for a lot of folks. And so I'm very excited because this year, well, in our founding year, which was 2020 for SPORE, we raised nearly $140,000.
Wow.
We gave just about $40,000 back to support COVID-19 mutual aid efforts across the country, and to other psychedelic nonprofits in the space to support their work. And we're also, so this year, we're launching our first major educational programming, and it's called psychedelic. It's called PRIME. I'm an acronym guy, Stuart. So PRIME. PRIME.
What is this one?
PRIME is a psychedelic responsibility, incubation, and mycelial education.
Nice.
And so SPORE's MO is mycelial organizing, which is, horizontal leadership, right? Decentralized. We want to create that. Well, we are creating this, general public education about psychedelics. And we're also actively, building a coalition of organizations and community leaders here in Denver and nationwide, but really focused here in Colorado, on creating a platform so that folks who are interested in really getting involved in psychedelics, folks who can recognize the cultural and societal, transformational value of how psilocybin and how psychedelics can help catalyze this emergent culture. We want to create that platform so that folks can share their knowledge and share their wisdom and share their experience and get involved and actually, potentially, get funded to do it. And so a lot of what SPORE's work this year, especially, is going to be around organizing this community here in Colorado and really identifying, what are the needs of our community. There are a lot of psychedelic communities in the US,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems to me that there isn't really a cohesive singular community,
Right.
right? And not from like a top-down perspective, but like, how are we all, if we're all sitting at this table together, what is, what's the most impactful way that we can move forward to engender this sense of cultural compassion and unity that's possible here. So that's a lot of the
Yeah.
work that Spore is doing, and we're launching Prime. I think right now our target is in April with that. And so,
Wow.
as a co-founder of Spore, so that first iteration of our general psychedelic education in April, where we're not educating people, we're bringing in the educators to talk about this work. And as a co-founder of Spore, I co-founded Spore with a good friend of mine. My partner, his name is Matthew Duffy. For the last year, I've been the executive director. I've stepped back as the executive director to let other better, more informed folks take the helm to really enable Spore and really build upon the foundation that we've built in the last year, to take the helm and focus on the community organizing and education work. So I'm staying on the board, but
Nice.
not running the daily operations. And that's
Because you've got some other things you're working on.
I have some other things I'm working on. So that's freed me up to, first of all, I'm the president of the Denver Psilocybin Mushroom Policy Review Panel.
Nice.
And that was mandated by our initiative in Denver as a panel to really assess and review the social, health, and fiscal impacts of decrim in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's looking pretty good. So there's that work. We have a comprehensive report that's due to our city council. We're going to have that in front of our council likely in mid to late March. And then I also, I'm a super green new lobbyist in Colorado now.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I registered my organization, my new organization, Helix Consulting Group. And I'm, directly lobbying elected officials at our state legislature. Really this year, identifying key allies in the legislature who may be willing to sponsor a bill to both decriminalize and regulate psilocybin for medical use in Colorado next year. So that's new. And so that's me doing, in full transparency here, I'm much more of that policy guy. I love to talk to elected officials and really like lay people about the benefits and the risks, right? But the benefits of psilocybin and its potential and other psychedelics. And so that, for me, doing that more top-down approach, engaging elected officials, educating them, seeing who might be open to sponsoring a bill in Colorado, because we'd prefer not to spend $5 to $8 million on a statewide campaign, right? Those funds can be used for something else. And so really giving kudos to Carlos Plazola and the folks at Decriminalize Nature, Larry, their model of engaging their elected officials first to do their due diligence before a lot of that cash is spent on a campaign, right? So if we can find allies in the legislature this year, and I think we have some already, we may have a chance at decriminalizing psilocybin in Colorado this year. Maybe, fingers crossed. And then we could potentially, push the needle here in Colorado as well in 2022, if not this year. And so much of this is around, it's all community in my mind, even though I'm a lobbyist, which is a term that has, I think, a lot of stuff attached to it. I've structured Helix and the work that I'm doing there to make it as transparent as possible, and open source as possible, and to really engage the community as much as possible. so that our elected officials here in Colorado, at the very least, know that there is a constituency that's supporting this work, and that's important to me. It's a community effort. Helix and Spore are deeply integrated, and there's just more work to do.
Always more work, but I'm so glad you're out there doing it. You're setting a really great example for other groups, around the country who are trying to make things like this happen in their own communities. I know you've been very, very generous with your time and your wisdom and knowledge that you've accumulated in your own efforts and sharing that with other groups. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm grateful for you coming here today and sharing your story and helping anybody else out there who's exploring the idea of psychedelics or who wants to get involved in their community to decriminalize. All of it has been very inspirational, and I'm really grateful for your time, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. It was certainly my pleasure. It's been a joy talking with you.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.